And this is a really important hearing. It's a tough issue, really difficult issue, because we're balancing kids coming into our country who we all have compassion for with our immigration system, families coming in, infrastructure that is inadequate to deal with it, and we've talked about that today with 700,000 pending cases. There's nothing like this, as Mr. Albanese just said, in the criminal justice system in this country, certainly. 700,000 cases pending, and with regard to unaccompanied kids, I think it's about 70,000, is that right? Mr. Edlow, do you know?
It's around 80,000, sir.
80,000. So, look, this is challenging. I got involved in this issue, as some of you know, a few years ago when we had 8 individuals from Guatemala who were sent by HHS from detention, HHS care, to traffickers, actually the same traffickers who had brought them up from Guatemala as their sponsors. Those traffickers then took them to an egg farm in Ohio where they were exploited and put into a forced labor situation. I want to thank DOJ this morning because we just learned this morning that the 7th defendant in the Marion case pled guilty yesterday to trafficking charges. And, you know, you all have been aggressive in going after these traffickers, and I appreciate that. But the problem is when these children come in, and now when the families come in, and the children are in HHS care, they then go out to these sponsors without adequate screening. That's certainly what our research has found over the last few years. And we have a legislative initiative that some of us on this committee, in fact, my 2 colleagues to the right, Senator Carper and Senator Langford, are very involved in this, are going to be shortly introducing, which we think will really help to put somebody in charge, have some accountability, for 2 reasons. One, to ensure these kids are properly treated, that we don't send them out with traffickers, but second, to get them to their court hearings and to ensure the immigration system is working. We learned that late last year there was a call that went out, a 30-day call that the Trump administration had initiated, which frankly was not done in the Obama administration, so that's a positive step, at least to have a call going to these sponsor families to say, you know, what's going on, where are the kids, and that some of you heard this number that 1,500 kids were unaccounted for. We'll have some new data we'll release later today probably, which shows that hasn't gotten much better. And a number of kids, a couple dozen, had left altogether, had run away from their families. So part of the problem is the fact that we don't have this infrastructure in place to deal with it. And again, it's not easy to put it together, but it seems to me there are 2 things that we should all agree on. One is to deal with the push factors, particularly in the Northern Triangle countries, because if we continue to have this push to the United States, we're going to continue to have enormous challenges, regardless of what kind of infrastructure we put in place. And second, we need to ensure that we have more judges, more expedited proceedings. As was said by the chairman and the ranking member, if you have these long wait periods, a couple years, it's far more likely you're going to have problems. And we've seen this in all of the data as we compare the detained versus the non-detained individuals and going to court. A couple questions, if I could, and Ms. Gamble, you talked a little about this, the enormous backlog, the reasons for it. But Mr. Edlow, you're with Department of Justice, so tell us a little more about this. If we allow detention of family units together, what would that do to the detained docket?
Well, certainly, Senator, it would add additional cases to the detained docket, as if we were not bound by the Flores Settlement Agreement, those cases could move forward on that docket as opposed to being released and placed on a non-detained docket. The department would prioritize its resources and its judges to ensure that we continue to not have a backlog on the detained docket. We do not have a backlog now. We would not have a backlog then. The problem in speculating too much as to how it would ultimately look, perceptions matter. So if there is a legislative change, or a termination of Flores that would ultimately allow for the detention of family units together during their immigration court proceedings, that probably is going to cut off one of the pull and push factors that you just alluded to before. So that may affect apprehensions. I can't speculate on whether that would, but certainly the department would put the resources that it has and that it will continue to gain to ensure that we can hear those cases. And I should note that the department has been working already very, very closely with the Department of Homeland Security to prioritize family cases and to ensure that those cases can be expedited, not accelerated. We want to make sure that the process is there as Congress has intended, and we want to make sure that the law is being enforced evenly and fairly, but we want to make sure that these cases are heard quickly. And we can do that now, and we will continue to do that.
I think it's important to prioritize those cases for all the reasons you said, but we also have to prioritize all the cases. In other words, we need to bring the backlog down for everybody. And again, 700,000, you talked about the number of days you talked about, which is about 2 years on average, even to get someone to court. And you talked about the fact that there is an appeal process after that. And let me ask you this, and maybe this goes to the entire panel. Have you given us a number? How much would DHS and DOJ need to be able to substantially reduce that backlog, let's say by half, over a period of a couple of years? What resources would be required?
Senator, I would have to...
And I give this to DHS as well.
I would have to work with our team and come up with
Would you do that?
Absolutely,
Because I think,
Senator.
that's sort of the question all of us are asking ultimately. One, how do you avoid the push factor and do more in Central America to avoid so many people coming here without documents and having this system that is going to be tough, as I said, no matter what. But then just dealing with the infrastructure, what kind of resources are required? As Senator McCaskill said, a lot of us, we want to put more funds into that than to other things. That may be true, because if you could, in fact, expedite these cases, it's much more likely they can be handled properly, and that we aren't going to lose people in the system, which is currently happening, and you aren't going to have issues that we talked about earlier of HHS actually putting kids into dangerous situations with sponsors who there is no accountability for. And by the way, that needs to be dealt with no matter what. I'm not going to get into that in this hearing because that's a separate topic, but we've got to get somebody responsible and accountable.
Senator, if I could add, in addition to adding the judges, ICE is in desperate need of attorneys to actually prosecute these cases. So if you only front load the judges, you're still going to have a bottleneck within ICE, because we need the attorneys and the support staff within our legal department to help prosecute these cases.
On both sides.
And we would need, obviously, officers to manage these cases. But in fact, the FY18 appropriations bill that gave us some additional attorneys, I believe it was 72, the appropriations language actually prohibited them from working on immigration cases. So we've got to be able to get the immigration
Mr. Edlow and Mr. Allman, so I would just ask, and I'm sure the chair would appreciate this, and ranking member, just give us a number based on reducing the backlog by half within 2 years. What would that take? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.